Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Steel met skin, cold and unforgiving, drawing a single bead of crimson that rolled down the ivory column of his throat like a tear. Prince Valerius didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't dare to breathe as he stared up into the eyes of the man pinning him against the rough stone wall of the battlement. They were eyes he knew, eyes like shattered obsidian, void of light, void of mercy, belonging to the man sworn to be his jailer, his tormentor, and the usurper's most loyal dog. "Do it," Valerius hissed, the words vibrating against the blade, a desperate invitation for death. "End it, Kalen. Prove you are the monster they say you are." But the hand holding the dagger didn't tremble, and the heavy, ragged breathing of the commander was the only sound in the freezing night air. The kingdom of Ethelgard was not a home. It was a graveyard buried under perpetual snow, and the obsidian palace was its mausoleum. For 3 years, Valerius had been the ghost haunting its halls. Once the crown prince, beloved by the people, he was now merely a spoil of war, a pretty bird with clipped wings, kept alive only because his bloodline legitimized his uncle's stolen ring. Valerius adjusted the high collar of his silk tunic, flinching as the movement pulled at the bruises hidden beneath the fabric. He stood before the floor-to-length mirror in his chambers, staring at a reflection he barely recognized. His silver hair, once lustrous, was now long and unkempt, framing a face gaunt with hunger and sleeplessness. His violet eyes, the mark of the royal line, were dull. The heavy oak door creaked open without a knock. It was the only warning he ever got. Commander Kalen Blackwood filled the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking out the flickering torchlight from the corridor. He was a mountain of a man, clad in the black and gold armor of the usurper's personal guard. A long scar ran diagonally across his face, bisecting his left eyebrow and ending at his jaw. A souvenir from the night the palace fell, the night Valerius lost everything. "The king requests your presence," Kalen said. His voice was a deep rumble, devoid of inflection. It was the voice of a weapon, not a man. Valerius turned slowly, lifting his chin in a defiance that cost him every ounce of his remaining strength. "Requests? Or commands?" Kalen stepped into the room, the heavy thud of his boots against the marble floor echoing like a death knell. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that Valerius could smell the scent of leather, steel, and the biting cold of the winter wind clinging to him. "Does the distinction matter to a prisoner?" "It matters to a prince," Valerius retorted, his voice sharp. "Then the prince should learn that pride is a luxury the defeated cannot afford." Kalen's gaze swept over Valerius, clinical and detached, checking for what? Contraband? Weapons? Signs of suicide? "Turn around. I must inspect you before you enter the throne room." Valerius stiffened. "You checked me this morning, and now I am checking you again." Valerius clenched his fists until his nails dug into his palms. This was the ritual, the humiliation, the reminder of who held the leash. He turned his back to the commander, squeezing his eyes shut as he felt heavy, gloved hands pat down his sides. The touch was firm, professional, yet it burned through the silk. When Kalen's hand lingered for a fraction of a second too long over Valerius's hip, the prince spun around, slapping the hand away. "Enough. I have no dagger, Kalen. I have nothing. You made sure of that." Kalen didn't recoil. He simply lowered his hand, his dark eyes locking onto Valerius's with an intensity that made the air in the room feel suddenly thin. "I make sure you survive, Highness. That is my order. Your order is to keep me breathing so my uncle can parade me around like a trophy," Valerius spat. "Don't pretend it's anything noble. Walk," Kalen commanded, stepping aside. The walk to the throne room was a gauntlet of whispers. Courtiers, once friends of his father, now averted their gazes or sneered behind jeweled fans. Valerius kept his head high, ignoring them, but he was acutely aware of the shadow trailing 2 steps behind him. Kalen Blackwood, the man who had opened the gates for the usurper. The traitor. The banquet was a grotesque display of gluttony. King Regulus, a bloated man with grease staining his beard, sat upon the throne that belonged to Valerius. He laughed loudly, spilling wine, while his sycophants cheered. "Ah, my nephew," Regulus bellowed, gesturing with a turkey leg. "Come sit." We were just discussing the fate of the northern rebels. Your old fencing instructor. What was his name? Ah, yes. Lord Harrow. His head looks quite striking on a pike. The room spun. Valerius gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Harrow had been a father to him when his own was too busy ruling. A wave of nausea and pure, unadulterated rage crashed over him. He reached for the goblet of wine in front of him, his hand trembling. He needed to dull the pain. He needed to not scream. I wouldn't drink that, a low voice murmured in his ear. Valerius froze. Kalen was standing behind his chair, ostensibly standing guard, but his body was angled to shield Valerius from the king's view. Why? Valerius whispered back, not turning his head. Is it poisoned? Finally. Too much hemlock makes for a messy death, Kalen muttered, his lips barely moving. And the king prefers his toys intact for the evening. Valerius looked at the wine. The dark liquid shimmered innocuously. He felt a sudden, perverse desire to drink it anyway. To spite Kalen. To escape this hell. He lifted the goblet. A gloved hand clamped over his wrist. Hard. I said no. Kalen growled, loud enough for the nearby guards to glance over. Is there a problem, Commander? The king's voice cut through the noise of the hall. The music died down. Silence fell like a guillotine. Kalen didn't let go of Valerius's wrist. He bowed his head slightly, his expression unreadable. The prince has had enough wine, Your Majesty. He is beginning to look unwell. It would be a shame if he vomited on your new rugs. Regulus narrowed his eyes, then burst into raucous laughter. Always the nursemaid, Blackwood. Very well. Take the weakling away. He sours my appetite anyway. Kalen hauled Valerius up by his arm, his grip bruising. He marched the prince out of the hall, not stopping until they were deep in the labyrinthine corridors of the East Wing, far from the prying eyes of the court. Valerius wrenched his arm free, stumbling back against the stone wall. Get your hands off me. I am not a child to be scolded. You are a child if you think suicide by poison is a victory, Kalen snapped. The mask of the stoic soldier cracked, revealing a flash of genuine anger. It is an escape. Valerius screamed, the emotional dam finally breaking. I have nothing. I am nothing. You took my crown, you took my freedom, and you let him kill everyone I ever loved. Why won't you just let me die? Kalen stepped forward, looming over him, radiating a dangerous heat. Because you are the only thing keeping this kingdom from burning to ash. Don't speak to me of the kingdom, Valerius sneered, tears pricking his eyes. You sold it for a bag of gold and a title. Kalen's jaw tightened. He looked away, staring down the dark corridor. Is that what you believe? It is what I see. Kalen looked back, and for the first time, Valerius saw something else in those obsidian eyes. Exhaustion. A bone-deep weariness that mirrored his own. You see what I allow you to see. Go to your room, Valerius. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me. And if I refuse, then you will die tonight, Kalen said softly. And I will have failed. Before Valerius could question the cryptic warning, Kalen turned on his heel and marched back toward the banquet hall, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The attack came 3 hours past midnight. Valerius hadn't slept. He was sitting by the window, watching the snow fall, when the screams began. They weren't the screams of torture from the dungeons. These were screams of surprise, of battle. The clash of steel rang out through the stone floors. Rebels, he thought, his heart leaping into his throat. Harrow's men. He rushed to the door, fumbling with the lock. If the rebels were here, he had to join them. He had to fight. The door burst open before he could turn the key. It wasn't a rebel. It was one of the king's personal assassins, a man named Silas who favored garrotes. Silas grinned, revealing rot-blackened teeth. Chaos in the courtyard, little bird. The king thinks it's time to prune the family tree before the rebels get ideas. Valerius stumbled back, reaching for a heavy brass candelabra. Stay back. Silas laughed, pulling a wire from his belt. Make it easy, Highness. It hurts less if you don't struggle. He lunged. Valerius swung the candelabra, but he was weak, malnourished, and untrained. Silas caught the blow easily, backhanding Valerius across the face. The prince hit the floor hard, the taste of copper filling his mouth. Silas was on him in an instant, the wire descending toward his throat. Valerius clawed at the assassin's face, kicking, gasping, staring up at the ceiling as his vision began to spot. So this is it, he thought. I die on the floor alone. Then, the door splintered. A black blur slammed into Silas, tackling him off Valerius with the force of a battering ram. The two men crashed into the vanity table, shattering the mirror. Valerius gasped for air, coughing, dragging himself backward. Kalen Blackwood stood over the assassin. He wasn't the composed commander now. He was a beast. His helmet was gone, his hair matted with blood that wasn't his own. Silas scrambled for a dagger, but Kalen stepped on his wrist, the crunch of bone audible even over the chaos outside. You, Silas wheezed, looking up at Kalen in horror. You turncoat. Kalen didn't speak. He drove his sword downward in a single, efficient arc. Silence returned to the room. Kalen turned to Valerius. He was breathing hard, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead, running down the scar on his cheek. He looked terrifying. He looked beautiful. Get up, Kalen rasped, sheathing his sword and extending a hand. We have to move. Valerius stared at the hand. The hand of the traitor. The hand of the savior. You killed him. He was the king's man. I know whose man he was. If you leave with me, there is no going back, Valerius whispered. You will be hunted. You will be executed. I have been a dead man walking for 3 years, Valerius, Kalen said, his voice rough with an emotion Valerius couldn't place. Since the day I chose to stay behind and serve a monster, solely to ensure his nephew didn't suffer the same fate as his father. Valerius felt the world tilt. The realization hit him like a physical blow. You stayed for me. Who else would guard the wolf's den but the hound? Kalen's eyes softened, just a fraction. Take my hand, Valerius. Please. Valerius reached out. As their palms touched, a jolt of electricity arced between them, fueled by adrenaline and a sudden, overwhelming shift in their reality. Kalen pulled him up, not letting go, dragging him toward the secret servant's passage hidden behind the tapestry. They ran. They ran through the damp, cobwebbed tunnels that twisted beneath the palace like guts. Kalen knew every turn, every loose stone. He moved with a limp now, and Valerius realized the blood on Kalen's side wasn't from an enemy. You're hurt. Valerius panted as they paused in a narrow alcove to catch their breath. It's nothing, Kalen gritted out, leaning against the wall. His face was pale, the sweat making his skin shine in the dim light of the singular torch Valerius carried. It's not nothing. You're bleeding through your armor. Valerius set the torch in a sconce and stepped closer. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't looking at a guard. He was looking at a man who was bleeding for him. Valerius reached out, his fingers hovering over the clasp of Kalen's breastplate. Let me see. Kalen caught his hand. His grip was weaker than before, his skin burning hot. We don't have time. If you collapse, I can't carry you. And I won't leave you, Valerius said firmly. The defiance was back, but it wasn't petulant anymore. It was regal. Kalen stared at him, his pupils dilated. He slowly released Valerius's hand. Valerius undid the clasps with trembling fingers. He pulled the heavy chest piece away. Beneath the chainmail and the linen shirt, a deep gash cut across Kalen's ribs. It was ugly, but the bleeding had slowed. Why? Valerius asked, his voice barely a whisper as he tore a strip from his own silk sleeve to bind the wound. Why endure the hatred? Why let me believe you were one of them? Kalen hissed as Valerius tightened the makeshift bandage. He looked down, his gaze heavy. Because if you hated me, you wouldn't look at me. And if you didn't look at me, the king wouldn't see the way I look at you. If he knew you were my weakness, he would have used it. He would have broken you to break me. Valerius froze. His hands rested on Kalen's heaving chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of the knight's heart. I am your weakness, Valerius asked, his voice trembling. Kalen reached up, his rough, calloused hand cupping Valerius's jaw. His thumb brushed over the cheekbone, wiping away a smudge of dirt. You are my king, Kalen whispered, the title sounding like a prayer. You are my soul. Every breath I have taken in this godforsaken castle was for you. The distance between them vanished. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, tasting of blood and fear and 3 years of unspoken longing. Kalen kissed him like a starving man, and Valerius kissed back with the ferocity of someone finally finding air after drowning. He tangled his fingers in Kalen's hair, pulling him closer, needing to feel the heat, the life, the absolute loyalty of the man he had sworn to hate. When they broke apart, breathless, forehead resting against forehead, the silence of the tunnel felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. "We have to go," Kalen murmured, though he didn't move away. "The rebels are breaching the west gate. If we can get to them, we can rally the army. We can take it back." "We," Valerius repeated, testing the weight of the word. "Yes, we." They moved again, but the dynamic had shifted. Kalen was no longer the jailer leading a prisoner. They were partners. They burst out of the tunnels into the chaos of the snowy courtyard. The night was ablaze with fire and the clash of steel. The king's guards were faltering, overwhelmed by the sheer number of northern rebels pouring over the walls. "There," a voice shouted. It was Regulus. The king stood atop the main staircase, surrounded by his elite guard. He spotted Valerius and Kalen emerging from the shadows. His face twisted into a rictus of hate. "Blackwood, bring me his head, and I will make you a duke." Kalen drew his sword. He didn't look at the king. He stepped in front of Valerius, his stance immovable as a mountain. He raised his blade, pointing it not at the rebels, but at the elite guard. "Come and take it," Kalen roared, his voice cutting through the din of battle. The elite guards charged. The fight was a blur of violence. Valerius stayed at Kalen's back, wielding a sword he had scavenged from a fallen soldier. He wasn't a warrior, but he was fast, and he fought with the desperation of a man protecting his heart. But Kalen was a storm. He moved with a lethal grace, parrying, striking, protecting Valerius from every angle. He took cuts, he took bruises, but he did not fall. Until the arrow came. It wasn't aimed at Kalen. It was aimed at Valerius. Kalen saw it. He didn't hesitate. He threw his body across Valerius's path. The thud of the arrow hitting armor was sickening. Kalen stumbled, dropping to one knee. "Kalen!" Valerius screamed, catching him before he hit the snow. "I'm fine." Kalen wheezed, blood bubbling past his lips. The arrow had found the gap in his armor, just below the shoulder. Regulus laughed from the stairs, knocking another arrow. "How touching. The dog dies for his master." Valerius looked at Kalen, pale, bleeding, fighting to stay conscious. Something inside the prince snapped. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. He stood up. He didn't look at the sword in his hand. He looked at his uncle. "You call him a dog," Valerius shouted, his voice ringing with the authority of kings past. "But you have forgotten what happens when you corner a wolf." Valerius didn't charge. He didn't need to. Behind Regulus, the shadows moved. The rebels had flanked the stairs. But Valerius wanted the final blow. He grabbed the spear from a fallen guard and hurled it with every ounce of rage he possessed. It wasn't a perfect throw, but it was true. It struck Regulus in the thigh. The king howled, tumbling down the stairs, landing in a heap at the bottom, right at Kalen's feet. Kalen looked up, his vision swimming. He saw the tyrant who had enslaved them. He saw Valerius standing over him, fierce and terrifyingly beautiful. Kalen forced himself to stand, using his sword as a crutch. He placed the tip of the blade against Regulus's throat. "Mercy," Regulus squealed. "I am your king. My king." Kalen gritted out, looking past the fat man on the ground to the silver-haired figure standing in the snow. "Is the man whose hand I hold." He didn't kill him. He didn't need to. The rebels were there, surrounding them. The war was over. Valerius dropped his weapon and fell to his knees in the snow, wrapping his arms around Kalen's waist, burying his face in the bloodied armor. "You idiot," he sobbed, the adrenaline crashing. "You absolute idiot." Kalen dropped his sword, his good arm wrapping around Valerius, holding him tight enough to bruise. "I told you," he whispered into Valerius's hair, as the snow began to cover the red stains of the courtyard. "I would survive. For you." And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Valerius take control, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a man who pretended to be your enemy for 3 years just to keep you alive? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt, masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art, 2 men, BL, Yaoi, Man 1. Prince Valerius, silver long hair, violet eyes, wearing torn white silk tunic, distressed expression, kneeling in snow, holding the other man. Man 2. Commander Kalen, black hair, scar on face, wearing black and gold armor with battle damage, bleeding, kneeling on one knee, holding a sword, protective pose, looking at Valerius with intense devotion. Background is a snowy palace courtyard at night, fire and smoke in distance, dead bodies blurred in background, falling snow, dramatic lighting, cinematic composition, sharp focus, intricate details, emotional atmosphere.